Last class, we were discussing the origins of the civilization-forming process, the Neolithic Revolution. So now that you have all gotten a glimpse at how it is that humans went from being tribal societies of hunter-gatherers into urban-dwelling populaces, beginning what we would later call civilizations, let's take a look at a first group of those civilizations. I'm referring, of course, to Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, meaning land between two rivers in Greek, or Mesopotamia. Spelt there, that's mu, epsilon, sigma, omicron, pi, omicron, tau, alpha, mu, iota, alpha. This determination of Mesopotamia does not refer to one specific culture or government, but rather to a group of interrelated civilizations that all existed between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now Iraq. Now, the reason for human beings settling in what we would now consider a barren desert is the fact that there are massive silt deposits. Now, if any of you have ever stuck your feet into a creek and felt that slimy, nasty, mucky stuff on the bottom, some people have compared it to what's at the bottom of a public pool, but I will guarantee you there is definitely more fecal matter in it. That is silt. And these silt deposits are necessary for the formation of agriculture. See, the decomposing plant and animal matter inside silt, that's the fecal matter, the decaying flesh, decaying plant matter, etc., is actually very good for plant growth. And so when these rivers would flood, they would leave, the waters would rise and then they'd retreat, and when the waters went back into the river, they would tend to leave this silt deposit on the land. And that's one of the reasons why people settled there, was because food grew very well there with large silt deposits. So, the first group of these civilizations is Sumeria. Now, the Sumerians have 3 city-states that form. The oldest of these is Uruk. This is where the Epic of Gilgamesh is set. It's one of the earliest ones, and it probably began sometime around probably a little bit before 4000 BCE. Later on is Ubaid, and then the last of these is Ur. By the time we're around 3300 BCE, Ur is already established, and by 1800 BCE, there are still references to Ur, although by this point Ur has already gone through conquest and things of this nature. Now, the Sumerian people spoke a unique language, the Sumerian language, which is unrelated to any modern language family. So it's not similar to the languages of India or Europe or Africa or the rest of the Middle East. It's entirely its own entity. We suspect that there are other languages that existed at some point that were similar, but these languages probably never got written down. Or if they were written down, they were written down on something like wood that didn't survive, and as a result, we don't know of any other languages that are related to Sumerian. Now, the polytheistic pantheon. So, at this point, Sumeria, like most urban cities at this point, has developed a polytheistic religion. That's a religion with multiple gods and goddesses. And a lot of these gods and goddesses can be referenced in both the Enuma Elish, which is their main creation epic, as well as the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is probably one of the most fascinating adventure stories ever written. And the fact that it was written over 3,000 years ago, over 4,000 years ago, makes it a classic of world literature. So, some more information about Sumeria. It was ruled by priest kings. So the king was also the high priest. So he was responsible for the political and military future of the city-state. Now the Sumerians believed that their gods dwelt in the sky and on mountaintops, which is a problem because they are now living in a river valley. So the solution that they compose to this problem is ziggurats. Ziggurats are massive step pyramid temples. And the temple itself, the actual building where the statue of the god would be located, was on top of it. And you would climb up the steps to the top of the temple, and that's where you would make your offerings to the god or goddess to which that ziggurat was dedicated. A lot of the common folks would use statuettes, little mini statues, often of themselves or of the gods or of servants that were supposed to serve the gods, to try to petition the gods, to try to get the gods on their side, to get some type of service. And there was this very profound idea that the gods require sacrifice. It's a major idea in Sumerian polytheism and a major idea in polytheism in general. This notion that, especially in these early polytheism, in classic polytheism, that the gods required sacrifices. They got nourishment from these sacrifices, from the animals and whatnot that you would sacrifice, and that they required this. And so this was something that human beings had to do in order to appease the gods and to get the gods on their side, to influence those forces of nature which they believed these gods controlled. So, farming. One of the big innovations is the irrigation ditch. So you would take it, you'd go down to the river and you start digging a ditch, and you dig that ditch out to a field farther from the river. And by doing so, you could water crops in the desert. You could extend your fields greater distances from the river itself. This is what allowed these societies to grow even larger, was the fact that you could now plant well beyond the boundaries of the river itself. So, writing systems. One major innovation that comes out of any civilization, and Mesopotamia is no different, is a writing system. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have no languages that are similar to Sumerian. So how do we understand these people? Well, what it is that they wrote in a language called cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped writing. Now, cuneiform is fascinating because of the fact that it is an ideographic language, similar to hieroglyphs, where ideographic does not mean idiot language. Ideographic means that one symbol equals one word or one idea, as opposed to an alphabetic language where one symbol or one letter equals a sound. Now, the benefit to ideographic writing is that multiple cultures using different spoken languages can still understand the same writing system, because that one symbol equals one word or one idea, rather than the sound of a word. You just have to recognize the form of it. So this symbol over here that my mouse is hovering over, or this symbol over here in later cuneiform, that means bird. Now, whether you pronounce that word as bird or as something else, little flappy thing that flies in the sky, you know that this symbol equals that thing. Now, the problem is that you need to know quite a few of these. So let's test out this. I want you to see the problem a little bit firsthand. So on the next page in your packet, you'll notice you're being asked to write a sentence. Using this chart on the evolutions of Akkadian cuneiform, and you can use the early ones, the 3000 BC and earlier cuneiform, or you can use the later cuneiform, whatever floats your boat. But try to write a sentence, even just a basic first grade type sentence, using only cuneiform. So, best of luck. Alright. So, as you probably noticed at this point, you still, even though I've provided you with several symbols, you don't have enough words to even write a proper sentence. That's okay. This is a deliberate act of this exercise. This is a problem with an ideographic language. You needed to know thousands, literally thousands, of different characters, and you'd be barely literate. Compare this to our modern alphabet, where you really only need to know 26 characters maybe a little more if you count each, double that if you count each lowercase letter as a separate character. And you can write anything. You can write literally any word, any writing level. Same set of characters, same set of letters. You don't have to learn new sets of symbols to gain levels of literacy. In the geographic language, you do. So that's the issue. So technology. The wheel. Out here in the deserts of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians developed the wheel. First used for pottery and then later for chariots. Now their chariots were of a four-wheeled, two-axle variety, similar to a cart, really, and pulled by mules, pulled by donkeys. Now, later chariots are going to develop that use horses, but we're not at that point yet. They also developed the lyre, which is a harp-like instrument. They use mud bricks along with stone to build their structures. They also learned to bake clay, and using that baked clay, they would make tablets. That's how they'd record their writing. So they'd make the wedges, the cuneiform wedges in the tablets, and then they'd bake them in a kiln, and they would produce tablets that you could then read even centuries, if not millennia later. You also had pottery. Clay pots, pans of various sorts were essential for day-to-day life. And a large amount of the archaeological remains we found of this civilization and others are little shards of pottery. Finally, what's a discussion of a civilization without a discussion of exactly how it is they kill people? And the answer to that is bronze weapons. At this point, we are out of the Neolithic and we are entering the Bronze Age. Human beings have discovered bronze, which is a softer metal, but it's a metal that can be hardened with repeated hammering, and it is useful as a weapon. It can be sharpened to an edge. It holds an edge better than stone. It's more flexible, less brittle, just all around a better tool. The main problem with bronze is that it's expensive because it requires copper and zinc to make it. So the bronze forging process was longer, much more risky, and much more expensive. And this is going to eventually lead human beings to look into better metal sources. Bronze is also can be softer than other metals. So this is why it's going to eventually be replaced by iron and steel in the upcoming millennia. So Acadia. The Akkadians conquered Sumeria. Their language itself was a Semitic language, which means it's similar to modern-day Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. However, because they still used the cuneiform writing system, they still kept the same body of literature, a lot of the same gods, a lot of similar cultural elements to the Sumerians. And it's due to the Akkadians that we actually understand a lot about Mesopotamian culture. Now, they traded with as far afield as Egypt and the Indus River Valley civilization. And we know that because we found seals, little name stamps, basically, with cuneiform writing on them in Akkadian. As far away as the Indus River Valley in India, and as far away as the Nile River Valley in Egypt. Then we have Babylon. Babylon is another city-state that developed. And although they spoke the Akkadian language, they were not ruled by the Akkadian kings, but were their own separate political entity. And they existed closer to the late Bronze Age, so this means closer to 1800 through 1500, all the way down towards 1200 BCE. Usually the year 1000 BCE is around the cutoff between the end of the late Bronze Age and the beginning of the early Iron Age. Now, one of the major innovations of the Babylonians is codified law. We're going to talk about that more when we talk about Hammurabi's Code. So, Hammurabi's Code is one of the earliest examples of codified law. That means it's written laws with written punishments. Now, these written laws and punishments are based on a system called lex talionis, or law of retaliation. So, you did something to someone, that would be done to you. And there were different penalties based on different social classes. So on your next page, I want you to look I want you to answer